So Eric, I'll turn it over to you. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with this next session. As I mentioned, we have a brief session right here. We'll have a breakout, come back for a quick wrap up, and that's going to be our day right now. We're on pace to be wrapped up here around 2:30, 2:40, so you'll have some time to visit and still be out of here by 3 o'clock according to the schedule. This is the most difficult presentation of the day because you're all full. I just want you to know that if during the presentation you become extremely prayerful, I will fully understand. I recently had someone come up to me after I preached and he apologized. I said, Wayne, I need to apologize. He said, I have been working the graveyard shift and I have not slept in 26 hours. He said, you got up and started talking and I went right to sleep and did not wake up till you said stand and sing. And I said, do not feel bad. Some people get nothing out of my sermons. You at least got a good night's rest. So if you need a good night's rest right now, I understand completely and you are forgiven. I just would expect the same courtesy if I doze off during the presentation. So with that being said, I found a magazine article. It caught my attention because the title was Men Who Don't Cheat. But more engaging than the title were some of the actors that were depicted there that had been in one marriage and had been married for a long time. There were guys like Martin Sheen and Kevin Bacon and Dan Aykroyd, John Lithgow, Jeff Bridges, Alice Cooper, the rock star. One that was surprising to me was Alda, a guy who is pretty progressive in some of his theology and in his politics. He's been married to one woman for a long time. So I was fascinated as to why this author, what she concluded were the reasons that men don't cheat. Gentlemen, this is why you have been faithful to your wife. Number one, you are cheap. Having an affair takes money. Your wife may be content with not getting flowers and candies and all those things, but a girlfriend won't go for it. If it's not that, it may be that you are a scaredy cat. That your biggest fear is the fear of getting caught. Also, it is that you are very busy and affairs are time-consuming. You're not really committed to your wife as much as you are committed to your calendar, and you just don't see how to squeeze another thing in there. This one was my favorite, probably because it hits so close to home. It simply says, bores can't get dates. Following up right behind that, not only are you boring, you'd be glad to know that those of you who are faithful to your wife, it is because you are incredibly lazy. And having a girlfriend takes work. And then, as if not to cap it all off, you're just plain ugly. You fooled one girl, but you'll never fool. There is one more here, but it only means something to some of us who are a little older. You have seen the movie Fatal Attraction. You're afraid that you're going to find a gal that will boil the family pet and come after you with a knife. So I don't know how that magazine, AARP, got into my household, but I canceled my subscription after reading that because I don't believe that that's why men are faithful to their wives. I am convinced that for the most part, the reason that men are committed to their wives is because they are men of character and commitment. In other words, they said they would, and they're doing everything they can to keep their word. Because we all know that faithfulness is an admirable characteristic. We know that faithfulness is essential for a marriage. Even those that maybe aren't faithful in their marriage know that unfaithfulness is destructive. I mean, you don't hear anybody going, you know, our marriage is really rocky right now. What we could use is a good dose of unfaithfulness. In a world in which values are certainly skewed, we don't find people going, you know what I admired most about that political candidate is that he or she is unfaithful to their spouse. I mean, that's why when we find out someone in our community, someone of notoriety, has left their wife or cheated on their husband, it finds its way to not only the cover of the tabloids, but to the headlines of our daily newspaper, and everybody is aghast. No one says, I'm so happy to see that they're unfaithful. Unfaithfulness destroys. It is why the Hebrew writer says, let the marriage bed be undefiled. I'm convinced that this is not just a matter, that is faithfulness, of sexual fidelity, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. But I can tell you that unfaithfulness in any form always is destructive to a marriage. And there is no case that to me is more personal than an event that happened about 3 years ago. It was Christmas time. My daughter and her husband, they've only been married about 14 months, were there at home for the holidays, and it was revealed to us by her that for the previous 3 months she had been carrying on an illicit relationship. She had been cheating on her husband with another man. There was some crying, there was some yelling, there was some talking, and we let them go back home with the anticipation that they were going to try to give it another chance and work on this. Our pleading was, give this a month and let's see if we can't find some things. 26 days later, her husband called to say she had moved out. Within a couple days, we found out she had moved in with this guy. Within a few months after that, she had divorced her husband, and because Oklahoma required a waiting period, she had waited to the calendar day as long as she needed to, and she had married that man and is living with him today, and it destroyed her marriage. It destroyed her mother, who had borne her, who had watched her grow up, who had nothing but high expectations for her in her marriage. It destroyed her father, whose little princess was now not everything that he wanted her to be, who wanted to love her and care for her and protect her, and yet she was willing to abandon everything that was important. It was devastating to her 4 brothers who, though they picked at her relentlessly when she was little, were the first to come to her defense, and they were devastated. It was devastating to a niece and some nephews who asked, "Where's Yaya? Why do we not see Yaya anymore?" It was devastating to grandparents who had tried to not only raise children but to encourage grandchildren. It was destructive to friends, even some of whom I didn't think were the best influence, who said simply, "Leslie, surely you know better than this." There is nothing about unfaithfulness that is good for a marriage. It is a long-reaching problem that affects more than just that family. I think about a 24-year-old young man who had a view of hopelessness on his face when he looked without words, and his eyes said, "What do I do now? What have I done? I mean, I didn't even keep my wife faithful to me for 11 months. What do I do now? Where do I pick up the pieces?" I mean, it was even admirable that he said, if she would just turn around and come back, I'd forgive everything. But she wasn't willing to turn around, and as of today, she's not been willing to turn around. This is where I get the hearty amen, even if it's not vocalized, because nobody believes that sexual infidelity is a good thing for a marriage. But I fear that sometimes we are so busy watching the front door of our marriage for sexual unfaithfulness that we allow unfaithfulness in other areas to come in the back door. In some things that in and of themselves are not sinful and not wrong, but they have taken a wrong place. And it's that where for the next 20 minutes I want to focus your attention. I'll focus your attention on some places in which unfaithfulness that are not sexual infidelity creep into our marriages. The first of these are what I call family or children unfaithfulness. This is where children or parents or another family member take the place and position that should be reserved only for your spouse, and I'm not speaking of anything sexual or inappropriate. We know of a family whose son is 9 years of age, I think, right now. He has never slept alone a single night since he's been born. He alternates between one night sleeping with mom, one night sleeping with dad. When mom sends him off to school, she is literally beside herself in sorrow, not being able to be separated from him. She spends spring break taking him to everywhere and doing everything and posting pictures, my little man, my little man, my little man. There's nothing inappropriate sexually, but her little man has taken the place of the man that she made a commitment to. It is not a good thing. And sometimes our little man or our little princess becomes more important than the person that we committed ourselves to. Sometimes it's our parents. Sometimes it's another family member. It's not inappropriate to have a great relationship with parents or with siblings or some other, but when they begin to take that place in your life that was reserved for your spouse, I believe, though it is not sin in and of itself, it is unfaithfulness, and unfaithfulness always destroys. The second kind of unfaithfulness is what I call friendship unfaithfulness. Much like that family or child, it is when a group of friends or an individual friends now becomes our most favorite person. It might be a lady that is part of your book club. Gentlemen, it might be unsettling to know that you may very well have become unfaithful to your spouse with the guys that you spend every Saturday with in the duck blind. Again, it's not a sexual interaction, but it is the idea in which these people are the people that you would most prefer to be with. They have become your very best friend when in fact your spouse should be that very best friend. But it can become very severe. I know of a man, him and his wife married 60 years. Turns out that he had been having multiple affairs with women. His defense was, oh, there was nothing sexual. We didn't hold hands, we didn't kiss, we didn't embrace. There was no physical contact. We were just friends. Now there's a Hebrew expression, phooey. Nobody buys that for a minute. Not that there was something going on sexually, but the fact is there's nobody that said, oh, in that case, it's just fine. You go to the movies with them. You go have coffee with them. You go to their house and visit and play games, and you leave your wife behind. That's understandable. The same can be of our golf buddies, our hunting buddies, our fishing buddies, our work buddies, our girlfriends, our boyfriends. All have nothing to do with sexual infidelity, but they are unfaithfulness nonetheless, and unfaithfulness always destroys. Or maybe it is that it's one of those other little friends. I have Tammy calls my iPhone my very best friend. Let me see if she'll be cooperative today. Siri, what is my name?
You're Wayne. But since we are friends, I get to call you Your Majesty.
I cannot get Tammy to call me Your Majesty. But you know, Siri is a great friend. She'll answer me a question. She'll play music for me. She'll search the internet. She'll give me directions. Even when I speak curtly to her, she will say something like, now, Wayne, we're too good of friends for you to talk like that. But you know, our electronics can become our new best friend. It was at a seminar that we had. One of the attendees came up to me. He says, I wish you'd talked more. He's an older man, probably well into his 70s. He says, I wish you would have talked more about that kind of electronic unfaithfulness. He says, because my wife is in love with the Candy Crush. And I laughed like you until I realized that he wasn't laughing. He said, when I get up, she's playing Candy Crush. When I go to bed, she's playing Candy Crush. When we're sitting at the dinner table or the breakfast table or the lunch table, she's playing Candy Crush. We're in the car, she's playing Candy Crush. He says, we virtually never speak. She is in love with Candy Crush. We've seen those in the restaurant, right? The entire family sitting at the table, not interacting, all on our phone. And if you haven't eaten with Tammy and I. But as sad as it is in a family, it is devastating when these things, whether it is this, our television, our video game, becomes the thing. Some form of media, movies, television. I know individuals that they lock their family out, their wives and their husbands out because their program is on TV. Electronics are a wonderful thing, but they can be unfaithfulness. And unfaithfulness always destroys. And along with electronics has come the increased use of pornography. Now, I will say this, pornography, because of the fact that it is sexual immorality, is in and of itself a sin in any form. We don't have time to deal with that at all of its level, but it is devastating at that level in our relationship, not only to our spouse, but our relationship to our God. But pornography now, because of electronics, has become readily available. When I was a boy, to look at pornography, you had to go to some a seedy store on a back alley, or at least had to get past the mean, ugly woman, bless her heart, at the convenience store to get some magazine from behind the counter. But now, wherever you are, it is accessible. I counseled a married couple. They had been married for 7 years, divorced for 8 years, had been married for 7 years, and the same problem of pornography had come up because it was never resolved in the first place. And in those sessions, he confessed that when they had family night, the family would be gathered in the den watching a movie. He would be sitting behind everyone at his computer watching pornography while they were all in the same room together and no one knew it. It is too accessible. It is easy to reach it on your phone, on your laptop, on one of your smart devices, virtually anywhere in the world. Now, lest you women be thinking right now it's because men are pigs. May I bring something to your awareness that pornography is more on the rise amongst women than it is in men. The so-called mommy porn has found its way to your supermarkets, to your convenience stores, to your department stores, and to your movie theater. In pieces of so-called literature such as 50 Shades of Grey, which has such a perverted and twisted view of the relationship between a man and a woman, that I believe the decorum prohibits me expanding upon it. But it's not just that book. Tammy and I recently were at a Target, and there was a shelf that said 20% off. This wasn't 20% off because this was the stuff that nobody wanted. It was 20% off because it was the most popular items. And there, the top of the shelves was this trilogy, 50 Shades of Grey, and underneath it more than a dozen other trilogies of the same kind. And there was a woman standing there with two tow-headed boys, I would guess both of them under 5 years of age because they weren't in school. And she was thumbing through their pages. It's become so popular that in states like New York, and yes, even in my own California, it is replacing the Gideon Bible in hotels as the preferred reading. And a year ago, it found its way into mainstream USA in a movie that was painted as a movie of romance and excitement, and people lined up to see it. And if that were not enough, we're a year or so away from it appearing again in a new manifestation, and people will gladly turn over $10 to $15 to see that filth again. It is not a problem for just men. It is a problem for women, and it is not only sin, it is also unfaithfulness, and unfaithfulness destroys. There's also the unfaithfulness of what I call what might have been, or what might be. I so appreciate somebody sharing. It was expressed a little bit different than I heard it. This idea of those who look over to the other grass and realize how green that it is. Well, it may not be that it's that green, it's just that that's under your feet is so dried because you haven't been tending it. Because that other grass may be greener, but it has to be mowed and cared for as well. But there are those that said, well, I'll just tell you right now, my wife doesn't understand me, but my secretary, who's now on her third marriage, she does. Or the woman who says, my husband can't really meet my needs, but the guy next door that hasn't had a job in 3 years and is a louse, he really is interested in me. And before long, we began to write some scenarios about how wonderful it would be to be with them. And though they may never be acted upon, I am convinced that they are unfaithfulness nonetheless. Because that which has been taken into our mind begins to be conceived, and we live in a fantasy land, much like those who go through and buy those romance novels. By the way, they can be as much unfaithfulness as anything. Now, I shouldn't say that in general. My mom reads Amish romance novels. I had the same thought. I'm not quite sure if those two just, and then when she brushed up against him, he knew it was love at first sight. And so he asked her daddy for permission to date her. I don't know how that all goes. So that may not quite be the same, but here's the deal. The fantasy land, the what might be, let me just tell you right now, the reason that woman at work likes you as much as she does is because she doesn't have to live with you. And the reason that man gives you all the attention that there is because he's got no life and has no idea what it's like to live with your perpetual nagging. All those things that aren't being tended in your own garden, you just carry those with you into the other. And so it is that unfaithfulness comes into a marriage in a variety of forms, and it is always destructive, even if it doesn't end or result in divorce. Even if those things in and of themselves are not wicked or sinful, when allowed to go or to be carried on, that they can be. I want to add another one of these freebies, no extra charge for this unless Eric decides, no, there's extra charge for this. I've had those that have come in regards to the subject of pornography, and they've taken me to Matthew chapter 5, the passage I referred to a moment ago, in which Jesus says, if a man lusts, he has committed adultery in his heart. And there are those that are looking for a loophole in their marriage contract and saying, well, that's adultery. And we know that Jesus, as well as the Apostle Paul, supporting it, that adultery, God permits the marriage to be dissolved and for there to be a remarriage there. But here's the thing is, that's not what that passage says. And if you want more clarification, I'd be glad to share later. But here's the thing. In that very context, Jesus also says if someone hates his brother, he's a murderer. Now, we're not calling for everyone who's ever hated to be incarcerated and held on a life sentence for murder. Jesus is making this point. He says faithfulness is a heart matter. Long before it is thought about, when it has been contemplated, unfaithfulness is already occurring. Even when it hasn't been acted upon, even when it doesn't involve a sexual immorality, unfaithfulness is always in the heart, because that's where faithfulness lies, in the heart. And there are some who with great defense says, oh, I thought it, but I've not acted upon it. I wanted it, but I haven't done anything about it. I could have, I just want you to know, but I didn't. When the truth is that unfaithfulness already is resting. May I just say, there is no room in the bed for three. You, your spouse, and unfaithfulness in any form, electronic or otherwise. And some say, well, unfaithfulness will never happen to me. And that is a foolish statement. The reason why is because unfaithfulness, like shoes, comes in every shape and size, and there's one perfect for you. Faithfulness requires an intentional action. It requires guarding that front door and the back door. It requires keeping yourself away from situations and circumstances that breed unfaithfulness, to stay away from company that could corrupt that commitment and character that you began with. It requires you to say, not only I won't, but I'm doing these things to make sure it doesn't. But I'm a pretty understandable guy. I understand that, sometimes things at home just aren't very good. And I want to be an open thinker. So let's just say that you've fallen in love with that gal at your work. Let's just say that you've fallen in love with the guy next door and that you're not in love with your husband or wife. I think more you're in lust and have fallen out of lust with your husband or wife. But let's give it that you're love. We've already established that love is seeking the well-being of another over yourself. So your first expression of love to this newfound love is for you to enter into a relationship that could potentially cost them their eternal soul. That sounds romantic, doesn't it? I would like, because I want, because I like, because I think, because I need, I would like to bring you into a relationship with me that would put at risk your relationship with God and put you in harm's way for eternity. Some husbands and boyfriends just give flowers, but I'd like to give you the potential of eternal condemnation because I love you. And I love others around me. I mean, the families that are left behind. I'm showing them how much I care for them by dumping them. I'm showing my children how much I love them by leaving their mother or leaving their father. I'm showing my family how much I love them by seeking their well-being, by serving myself. I'm thinking of my grandchildren that may carry that stigma with them on. Well, my father and mother were divorced, and my grandfather and my grandmother. Folks, I know that Jesus gives some instruction and even some appropriateness for divorce. But I'm just saying right now that there is nothing good about it. It is not something that one goes, this is going to be really beneficial. And the reason why is because divorce in and of itself means the severing of a relationship, not the building up of a relationship. So I don't want, this is not me castigate those who have been divorced, and I'm not pointing at any particular situation because there are some circumstances beyond. I'm talking by way of principle. That if we really are to be people of love, which I believe we are, and we want to show love not only for our spouse, but for those who are around us, then we seek their well-being, listen, over our own well-being, over our own desire, over our own well-being, or our interests and our desire. And so, I just want you to know that unfaithfulness, whether it's in TV or in music or in magazines, that it is destructive to your relationship, even if the two stay together, living alone in the same house. But let me give this message of hope. As destructive and devastating as unfaithfulness is, even in the form of sexual infidelity, it does not have to ruin a marriage. In other words, it can be recovered from. I knew a man and a woman, fine family, Christian family, workers in their local church. He did some preaching and teaching. She was very involved in the Bible school classes. They had 2 children. He was involved in a severe automobile accident. In fact, he was driving a car that went off the road when he fell asleep and killed the passenger that was with him in the car. For a period of time, he lay in a hospital room in a coma and then recovering. While he was there, one of the elders of the congregation came to comfort his wife, and things got too comfortable. They engaged in an illicit sexual relationship. When the man left the hospital, it was revealed to him by his wife what she had done. At that moment, you might say, how in the world could this man, an invalid for a time in the hospital, ever forgive that good-for-nothing wife for running around on him? How could they stand before that congregation of people and say now anything when everybody knew about their business? What about the children? What about those who are around them? He certainly couldn't teach and preach anymore because of that shame, and she wouldn't be allowed again into a Bible class. Maybe they were just going to have to disappear somewhere if they could even hold it together. But that's not the way that story ended. First of all, the woman repented of her wrong. The first step to real forgiveness. She took full responsibility. She took ownership and accountability for the thing that she had done. And in the beautiful parentheses of that, her husband in turn forgave her completely. I don't know about that elder. He left the church. As far as I know, he never repented of his sin. But this man and this woman did. In time, they rebuilt the trust in their relationship, and their relationship grew strong. They had another child. He, in fact, did eventually return back to preaching and teaching. She found her way again in the Bible school classroom. They began to travel and teach others how to preach and to teach. And people who knew them at his time of his death said, that is a godly couple. There's one of those families worth imitating. They wouldn't know what all of our struggles were, but let me tell you, they are the model of what we would want to be. They didn't know what happened in between. You see, it is why I gave you, and it is an abbreviated list, but as a place to start. There is some accountability when there is unfaithfulness. There is some repentance and a desire and actions to the contrary, towards that action, contrary to the way we've been living. There's going to need to be a place for trust. There's going to need to be a place for forgiveness. As devastating as unfaithfulness is, it does not have to destroy your marriage. It is fixable. I can tell you story after story of the most sordid tales of families that you would go, there is absolutely no way for that to be resolved. And it is. It has been. And though it would not be the path they would recommend for anyone, their marriage is as strong as it could possibly be because they found a way to, through repentance and forgiveness, to rebuild that. And so I leave you with these things regarding the subject of unfaithfulness. And that is the fact that unfaithfulness comes in all shapes and sizes, and you are foolish to simply say, it'll never happen to me, it will never happen to he, it'll never happen to she. And to take those active actions to prevent it from happening. And number two, unfaithfulness is not simply sexual infidelity. It comes in a variety of ways in which we begin to allow something or someone to take the place of our spouse. Unfaithfulness, no matter what form it takes, always, listen carefully, no matter what form it takes, unfaithfulness in any form always destroys. And finally, and I think it is important as well, that unfaithfulness, as destructive as it is, does not have to destroy a marriage if the necessary corrections and God's help are made. And so, in that regard, it can be recovered from. I kind of feel like that's after such a good morning and a good lunch, that's a little bit of a downer. So, ladies, as your reward, we're going to take a 11-minute break, and then you get to spend time with Tammy. Gentlemen, the walk of shame back to the auditorium for you, as we will be going for our last breakout session. And just so you know, kind of by the clock,